Yes, please. Thank you very much, and I just want to say I'm delighted that we have the Association of Asian Scholars here, and I'm very happy that Arvind and Sangeeta have forged this partnership. I hope it's going to be a very, very strong partnership in future, except that a little bit of friendly advice to Swaran: don't allow the Japanese and the South Koreans to opt out of this. Get them back in, because you're not good, because you're not going to get an Association of Asian Scholars without Japan and South Korea. They are both very essential in that. So, absolutely, absolutely. So, but I'm glad to hear that, Lena. Well, we have had some excellent presentation here by Professor Sridharan, and I think that is if listening to him, I felt as though I was listening to officials in the Prime Minister's office or the MEA, because this is the kind of reasoning that has been driving policy for quite a long time. Of course, as someone who's outside government, my own personal view is that this policy has been an abject failure in terms of results, that the situation has become worse and worse and worse for India. So I'm not entirely sure about how effective a policy based on such constructs is going to be. But I agree that these are very logical constructs, very skillfully presented, and they really represent mainstream analytical thinking on South Asia and, of course, South Asia with reference to other countries. Because we need to keep in mind one thing very, very clearly. You cannot create a box of South Asia and then seal it into a plastic bubble. I mean, if plastic is still allowed here. And then divorce itself from the rest of the world. The reality is that you can analyze South Asia only with reference to the rest of the world. Which is why I'm glad that you're talking in terms of Russia, you're talking in terms of China, you're talking in terms of the United States, because what we are seeing in South Asia, there's a very strong influence, certainly of the United States and now certainly of China. In the old days, much more of Russia, and these days not all that much of Russia. But a lot of the dynamics that Professor Sridharan was mentioning, a lot of the surprise that he is expressing in terms of the reactions of countries in South Asia to India, could be explained, I think, by the policies of the United States and China vis-a-vis India, and the encouragement they have given to countries in South Asia to adopt the policies that they have followed. We have seen this in the case of Pakistan, we have seen this in the case of Bangladesh. And today, what are we confronting actually in terms of the regional situation in South Asia? If we travel across the region today, the reality is that I think, barring perhaps Bhutan, India is no longer the lead player in any part of South Asia, except possibly itself, But barring itself, definitely I've just come back from Sri Lanka, and I'm happy to say that I was given a certain amount of time with policymakers there, spent quite a bit of time with them. It's very clear that China is today in the driver's seat in Sri Lanka. If you go to Nepal, I'm not entirely sure as to who's in the driver's seat there, because there are so many players, and it's, if you think Indian politics is fragmented, you've really not been to Kathmandu. It's much more than India. But definitely, India is no longer the prime player in Nepal. Sometimes, on some issues, on a lot of issues, it's China. On some issues, it's the United States. On some issues, it's Pakistan even. But on very few issues are we in the driver's seat. Of course, in Sri Lankan case, we have had this vote against Sri Lanka in the Human Rights Council. And with that, what little leverage we had over the Tamil issue, I think, we have lost. So I must say, Professor Sridharan, that even if Dr. Manmohan Singh, S.M. Krishna, and all of us in Manipal, we raise our collective voice asking Mr. President Rajapaksa to do something, he's going to come back and say, you voted against us in Geneva. We don't owe you anything. Why should we listen to you? And the reality is they are not listening to us because we have thrown that leverage away with the vote in Geneva. Of course, there are other points of view, human rights, etc., making a stand and various other issues. In that, my only point is, there are human rights violations across the globe. We have massive human rights violations taking place in Iraq and Afghanistan by soldiers from countries that are supposed to be observing human rights. We have a large number of problems in present-day Libya, for example, what is happening in present-day Libya, the murder of people who were close to Mr. Gaddafi, the suppression of certain tribes that were close to Gaddafi, all these are egregious human rights violations. And I've been to Syria quite some times. You see there a panic among the Christian community, a panic among the Alawites, a panic among the rest of the Shia, and among moderate Sunnis as to the identity of these freedom fighters that are being backed by several countries. So it's a very complex situation. And we cannot forget the involvement, I'm not going to say interference, of China and the United States in South Asia, because that is core to understanding a lot of the dynamics of the region. So I hope that a lot of the attention of this two-day meeting is going to be on US policy and Chinese policy in South Asia, because as I said, that's extremely core to understanding exactly why we are in the situation we today are in. Now, I'm addressing a fairly, a young audience, and if I may say so, although I'd like to say that Madhav, Kamath and I are probably the youngest in the room in terms of attitude. But in terms of the calendar, possibly we are not. But I just like to say that we are in a very, very evolving phase of our history here. We have a situation of very sharply rising expectations among the people of the entire region of South Asia. And the reason for that is that first cable television, from the 1980s onwards, cable television created a whole new change in the psychological dynamics of the people. You had a lot of people demanding a lot of things that they never demanded for 1,000 or 1,500 years before that because of cable television. And today you've got an even more powerful medium, which is the internet. Now I know that governments across the world, whether it's China, whether it's India, are trying very hard to suppress the net. And in India, the government has seen to it that our penetration is very low, bandwidth is extremely low. But despite all that, it is spreading. And the consequences of first cable television in the 1980s and the internet in the 21st century are very significant on the mindsets of the populations in South Asia. And we consider ourselves to be responsive to populations. I mean, even China, the Communist Party, is extremely responsive to the populations there. They spend an enormous amount of effort engaging public opinion, engaging the moods, engaging public priorities, and in trying to adjust the party policy to that for fear they're caught wrong-footed. So in every part of the world, the public opinion, public dynamics is very significant, and this has been completely transformed by the advent of internet following on cable television. So that's one the first factor is said, external involvement. The second factor is new technologies and the impact on people's minds, on people's aspirations. The third factor is that this is a very, very young part of the world. South Asia overall, if you look at Japan, if you look at China, if you look at Europe, if you look at the United States, these are aging countries. These are countries that are rapidly becoming very, very grey indeed. But South Asia is a very young part of the world. I mean, we have a young part of the world in the Arab world also, and we are going to have a huge lot of dynamics taking place there as a consequence of that. We have a very young part of the world, in some other locations like Egypt also. But South Asia is definitely a very young population. You combine that with an education system that is broadly dysfunctional. If you study curricula in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in normal schools in India, I'm not talking of the schools to which a handful of people go, I'm talking about schools to which tens and hundreds of millions of students go, you will find the curricula are completely unrelated to the needs of a modern global economy. In Pakistan, for example, the curricula, a large part of the student population is forced to go to schools where the teaching is basically imbued with what they believe to be a strong religious thing. So whether it's geography, whether it's history, whether it's mathematics, everything is taught from a very narrow prism of a particular aspect of what they believe to be faith. The result is, in my view, the purpose of an education is to equip the student with the mental instruments available for success in future life. The purpose of education is not just to spend 3 years having a good time or whatever it is, but the purpose is to equip you for facing realities outside. And if you look at the education system in much of South Asia, you will find the education system has completely failed that purpose. So we are now, in a sense, miseducating hundreds of millions of young people whose aspiration levels are rising sky high because of their access to cable television and the internet. And you're creating a huge dysfunction between what these people can really do for themselves and what they expect to be done to themselves is a huge dysfunction. And South Asia is going to be very, very important in that. That's a very, very important dynamic, a very fissile dynamic that's developing very rapidly here. Now, there's another point which I'd like to stress, and that, again, as I said, I was very, very, impressed with Professor Sridharan's very masterly exposition of the whole thing. But I think one of the problems is that we confuse India or Pakistan with the governing structures of India and the governing structures of Pakistan. And that's been a problem, for example, in US policy towards India. The entire focus has been on the governing structures. I'm not entirely sure they always got the best of intentions. But the reality is the system is today geared towards efficiently doing the worst of intentions. If you want the worst of intentions, it can be done very efficiently, very quickly, very speedily. If you're looking at the best of intentions, if you're looking at sound policy, if you're looking at rational policies, you'll find umpteen speed bumps, umpteen barriers on the way, with the result that eventually what comes out is a highly diluted version of what you expect, and a version which is quite incapable of fulfilling the ameliorative purpose that was supposed to be its motivation. So we have this very, I don't dare to use non-academic words like scary in the presence of the distinguished academics who are here, having come from a non-academic background and straight into academics. I'm a little wary of using, but for me, as a human being, it's an extremely scary situation that we are seeing now. It's a scary situation when we see governance structures completely collapse. It's a scary situation when all kinds of externalities come into the field of government policy. And allow me to end the time allocated to me by saying something about our department here and our policy on international relations. We set up this department and we set up this program to have an India-specific perspective on international relations. We can get brilliant perspectives from the University of Pennsylvania, we can get brilliant perspectives from the University of Fudan University, from Beijing, from Tokyo, from all these locations. But the reality is we need perspectives from India, which are based in India and rooted in the needs and realities of India. So we have set up this program to be an India-specific program. I hope that in the next 2 days from now, today and tomorrow, you are going to look at these things from the specificity of South Asia. Because today, South Asia is a region which is completely in a state of extreme flux. You go to Pakistan, you see ethnic flux, you see religious flux, you see administrative flux. You go to Bangladesh, you have the same problem. You go to Sri Lanka, it's the same thing. You go to Nepal, you go to India, even the Maldives. That island of tranquility. Even Bhutan is now roiled by all kinds of situations which are actually not predictable, if not entirely uncontrollable. So this is the stage on which we are having this conference, and I truly look forward to a very, very useful discussion on this over the next 2 days. Once again, thank you, Sangeeta, and thank you, Arvind, for organizing this, and thank